Buddy Coburn Sheppick here. I hope you're having a fantastic week. In today's video, we're going to be talking about leverage or debt. Using leverage can be one of the greatest tools of all times if used properly. Some of the most significant innovations of all time throughout history would not be what they are today without the use of financing. But there is such thing as good debt versus bad debt. And we're going to dive right into it today. So it comes down to two sort of categories. One is what you've heard of, which is assets and liabilities. And secondly is return on the investment, or really return on the financing. So first, let's talk about assets and liabilities. This is nothing new, but just to recap, assets pay you or provide you with tools for your business, and liabilities ultimately take away from you or cost you. So let's look at a few examples. If you are running a business, a computer costs money. It doesn't pay you, but without it, you would not be able to run your business efficiently or successfully. A car, on the other hand, is another big subject. Is it an asset? Is it a liability? We all need to get to certain places. We all need to be able to move around. So yeah, it costs money, it costs gas, it costs to take it to the mechanic, you have to take it to the car wash. So you would think this would be a liability. Yes, it is a liability. It can be a liability if you're constantly buying cars or exotic cars, but it is an asset because you need it to run a business and meet people and do certain things and be able to move throughout different areas. One of the biggest misconceptions about assets and liabilities really is your own home, the place that you live in, which I know a lot of people will argue with me on this subject, but a home, a rental property versus your own home, they're two totally different things. And here's why. If you own a home that you live in, it costs you money. You pay the debt, you pay the taxes, you pay the insurance, you pay the interest, you pay for the lawn to get cut, you pay when the roof needs to be repaired, you pay for the heating, you pay for everything and it actually never pays you. It's like a piggy bank. You're just storing your equity in that house. On the other hand, if you had a tenant in there, and which is the same, you would structure it the same as far as the debt goes, that tenant pays the insurance, it pays for the taxes, it pays for the principal, it covers the expenses of maintenance and upkeeping. And so these two circumstances are totally different. So a rental property is an asset. The own home you live in takes away from you. It costs you money, therefore it is a liability. You don't need to own the place that you live in. A lot of people like to, and that's totally different, but it is a liability. Another big subject is student loans or student debt. Now, obviously, if you are getting educated to go into a career that's going to pay you big bucks and cover the debt and the interest that you had to get there, that obviously would be an asset to you. It's the future of your life, it's the future of your career, it's the future of your retirement. Obviously, that's a no-brainer, it's an asset. Now, if you are using debt to go get an education that you may not know exactly what you're going after, or know what the exit is, or know what the strategy is to actually get a return on that, or get a career that's gonna pay for that, that would obviously be a liability, and a lot of people go wrong here. So to recap, assets pay you or bring value to you. Liabilities take away from you financially or take away from your value. Now let's talk about ROI, which is the return. So this really is when the term leverage comes in, to make a return on the borrowed debt. The first example I want to talk about is credit card usage. A lot of people don't like credit cards. A lot of people have a fear about them. A lot of people talk negatively about them. It's because people don't use them correctly. So credit cards can be a great tool if used properly. Let me give you an example. I never use a debit card, never. And I use a credit card for everything that most people would for a debit card. Just because I use credit cards doesn't mean I go out and buy everything that I don't need or don't want or can't afford. I buy what I would normally with a credit card instead of a debit card. Here's why. because there's advantages to using the credit. That most credit cards, and we'll get more into the subject in another video, but most credit cards reward you for the usage of the credit. So for example, I might make 3% cash back every time I go buy groceries, or every time I pay for fuel, or every time I need to pay for flights or hotels. I can receive cash back. And the 3% might not sound a lot because of the amount of money that's being spent, but over time it adds up. And regardless, either way, you would not be achieving the 3% return by using a debit card. So to take this into a real example, mortgages have historically been in the 3% range just not very long ago. That was the cost of using debt. Now, if I can make 3% by simply using my credit card, I'm not paying interest on it because I pay off the full balance every month. I can gain 3% on every time I use it. So credit cards, ultimately, if used correctly, if you pay off the balance, if you pay off everything that you spent on a regular schedule every month, so you're never paying interest, this is just like getting free money. You're making money off the credit card companies by taking advantages of the rewards. The next example I want to talk about is about rental property. Again, we just talked about owner-occupied homes, or the home that you live in. And this is a very fascinating subject because a lot of people have the goal to pay off their property. Now, this depends on where interest rates are at, of course, but let's use the example of the last few years where interest rates have been significantly low, and they are rising right now, we know, to combat inflation. But let's use 3% as an example, which is where they've been at for many years, for the last many years. So if I can pay for a mortgage at 3% and put a tenant in there, and the return on that property is 5%, I am making 2% on the bank's money. And I don't have to have as much capital into the investment. So the cash and cash return being leveraged versus owning it outright are massive because of the amount of capital you actually have into the property. So not only are we making money on the bank's money, 2% in that example, we're actually, the cash on cash return based on the amount of capital that we have into the property is much greater. So when it comes to the return, the cost of the debt is ultimately what matters most. So in our 3% example, let's look at in a rental property or home. Let's talk about your own home at a mortgage at 3%. So most people want to pay off their debt. Most people want to pay off their property and own their own home. So let's pretend that we have a home that's $300,000, which was a low-priced home in today's environment. Let's look at a $300,000 example. So if the goal is to own the home outright, that means you have $300,000 into the property. You own it outright. And let's say that interest rates currently are 3%. What we're asking ourselves is, can we make a better return elsewhere outside of this property than 3% on our $300,000? The answer is absolutely. The answer is, of course, it could be at minimum 6%. It could also be even up to 10 or 18 or 20% in many different cases, depending on the risk that you want to take, of course. But it could, at minimal, you could safely make 6%, which would be 3% on the bank's money. So the question is, can we make 3% on our $300,000, or would we rather make 3% by paying off the debt? That's what it comes down to. And in another example, when it comes to the return, this is a no-brainer. When you see 0% financing, 0% interest on something that you're buying, this is an absolute no-brainer if you are already going to buy that. So let me give you an example. If you are buying a laptop, you need a laptop, your laptop's toast, and you need a new computer to run your business, and Best Buy is offering 0% financing for 2 years. They make money if you are late They make money if you don't pay off the principal. If not, if you do, then you are borrowing money at 0% interest, and you can use your $1,500 or $2,000 and keep that money and pay a minimal fee, which goes towards the principal every month until that computer is paid for. This is a no-brainer. For one, it lets you borrow time, and time is something that we don't have. So this is an absolute no-brainer. When this doesn't make sense is if you are buying something that you actually do not need, and you're buying it because of the interest rates or the free financing. That would be a poor example, and basically buying something like how people have stigma around credit cards. So all of this is great, but there is a fact that is the risky part of this, which is being over leveraged. You've heard this term in certain down cycles like 2008 where people were over leveraged. It comes down to three main things: short-term debt, high interest loans, and negative leverage. So starting with short-term debt, in a real example, a lot of people in 2008 borrowed money for a short period of time to buy real estate, a lot of fix and selling types of loans. So that's called hard money. They're usually 12 to 18 month terms where you're borrowing money at higher interest rates to do this project and turn it over quickly. It's not permanent financing. It's not a 30-year amortized mortgage. It's 12 to 18 months where that principal becomes due. Now, just like anything, during that short-term period, things can change. And this is what happened, and this is why short-term debt is risky. Things can change during that 12 or 18 month period of time where the plan is not going to work out like we'd hoped. This is where you can become over-levered. And we'll use this same example for the next subject, which is high interest. So some of these short-term loans can be, for example, credit cards, which can be in the 20-26% range, which is absolutely insane amount of interest. And basically what happens is people get behind, it happens so fast, and all of a sudden they're paying boatloads of interest for something that they made a mistake on. So back to our real estate example in 2008 with these short-term loans, they're also high leverage, 10, 12, 15%. And when the market turned, things didn't go as planned. Now they're stuck in this high interest, paying out a ton of money to the lenders. And lastly is negative leverage. Just like what we were talking about before, how you can actually make a certain amount of money on the bank's money in our 3% example. If we can use that principal and make 6%, we're making 3%. That's positive leverage. Now, reversing that, there's such thing as negative leverage. Now let's use an example. So let's say that we buy a rental property at an interest rate of 5%. And after all the income that comes in, the income that the tenant is paying does not cover all the debt, all the interest. In that case, we're actually having to come out of pocket to pay the big man, to pay the lender. In that case, that would be negative leverage. What that property produces is not enough to pay the debt and also make a profit. The last thing I want to talk about is credit scores. Credit scores are something that people are so obsessed with. A lot of this younger generation with tools like Credit Karma, checking a credit score every day, every week, every month. This is complete nonsense. What we want to be is credit worthy. This means having a cash balance. This means having a good debt to income ratio. This means paying our expenses on time. And the way to do this, the way the wealthiest people in the world become credit worthy is by starting businesses. So everything that you buy, whether it be a car, a property, any type of asset, should be placed in an LLC. And the LLCs are all owned by a corporation. This corporation is what needs to become credit worthy. It's not about a credit score. So what's the takeaway? Use debt to buy assets and use leverage to amplify returns, not justify them. If you like this video, please give us a comment, a like, a thumbs up, all that fun stuff, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.